Welcome to Accedo Playback, the podcast discussing industry news, trends, and tech advancements in the OTT and streaming industry. Before we get into it with our guest today, I wanted to bring up some statistics from a recent study commissioned by Accedo. Almost 60% of those surveyed said that they will switch off a service immediately if the quality of the playback is perceived as too low. A third of respondents said the same thing about services where the general look and feel of the interface is not to their liking. So I'm sharing these stats to indicate the importance of high-quality user experiences to your end users and the challenges with this if you aren't collecting and analyzing the right info. So today we're going to get into observability and the importance of metrics for your OTT service with two special guests. General Manager of Media and Entertainment at New Relic, Chris McCarthy. Chris, thanks for joining.
Thanks a lot, Neil. Happy to be here.
And also with us is Head of Service Management at Accedo, Steven Kopec. Steven, good to see you again. Thanks for hopping on.
Hi, Neil. Thanks for having me.
Chris, do you mind just giving us a high-level overview of New Relic for those who may be unaware?
Sure. New Relic is the most widely used observability platform on the market today. So engineers in basically every industry use New Relic to gather the real-time insights and trending data about the performance of their software. And then we relate that to like the customer experience or the backend applications of the stack, cloud infrastructure, et cetera. So we're the only company that provides an all-in-one platform for that that's built as a unified experience. So that's taking all of the telemetry, whether that's metrics or individual user or request traces, logs from the backend surface, et cetera, and then putting that into full stack analytics tools.
So it's a little broad. So what does observability entail, and how do content providers leverage it to kind of proactively minimize streaming platform issues?
So when it comes to like observability, I feel like in the industry, there's been a shift to use the word observability from a prior term you may have heard, monitoring. Really at the heart, they're essentially parts of the same thing, but monitoring is the idea that you have all these signals, usually like metrics based, coming in from various parts of your platform that will tell you, okay, there's something's wrong somewhere, right? Whether it's a backend application has too much throughput, or you have your mobile app is crash rates are up, etc. Observability is about being able to ask ad hoc why when you have an indication that one of those things is going wrong. So in the context of sort of that broad scope I just described, observability is about having the individual user sessions, request data, log traces, so that when okay, something is going wrong, like, again, crash rates are up, or in the case of video telemetry, concurrent views are down, or buffer rate is high, and it's high in this area. When you need to ask why, you quickly go from having those aggregate analytics down to needing the individual user session data. And observability is the structuring of those metrics and the ability to filter down to those specific like logs, events, and traces that correlate with the telemetry that you have that's telling you what's going wrong.
Looping back to that study I mentioned at the top there, do you just have some thoughts around what challenges content providers generally face when trying to provide a high-quality streaming experience?
At the heart of it, I feel like a lot of content providers, there are a lot of tools out there that will give you a very good indication of what is going wrong. Again, you can get an indication that concurrent viewership down in this area, or buffer rate is high for users on this CDN in New York on iOS. But the next thing you have to do is go figure out, why is that actually happening? Like, why are my users in that particular region having an issue with buffering? Or it could be a specific, if it's like on-demand content, right? Okay, why is we uploaded a new season of some show to our catalog, and like users get to episode 3, drop 10 minutes in, like, what's happening? Is it an issue with the content itself? Like, is it an issue like with the actual, like, the asset? Is it like corrupted? There's an issue somewhere. Is something else happening when maybe a user has been watching for 90 minutes, something happens and the app crashes, and that's exactly where it happens to line up when they get in like a playlist experience, right? And then it just so happens that after that length of time, there's like a buffering issue, out of memory or something, and like, Roku restarts or something. Like, understanding that why is often very difficult. And that's why you need the full complement of telemetry, not just the metrics telling you what's happening in the user experience, but why through the entire stack.
Steven, any thoughts from a front-end perspective?
Yeah, so actually, across the whole perspective, the strength of observability is, as Chris mentioned, not just the metrics, but the why, right? And being able to tie that all the way from the front end application all the way back to the back end infrastructure. It may be, as he mentioned, a CDN problem. It may be a location problem. We see this over and over with our customers who experience problems with their services, where it may be affecting one town or one city or one type of device, and it all comes back to the need to be able to tell why and not just what.
So a lot of this is kind of discussing how observability tools are used for, troubleshooting and addressing problems. But what are some examples or options that content providers can use observability platforms for, just to optimize or improve experiences? So I guess kind of rather, what's a good way of phrasing it? Prevention rather than reaction.
So one of the ways we use it is to help optimize both infrastructure. So being able to see when the infrastructure that we built or we're servicing for a customer is underutilized, overutilized, and being able to make adjustments to improve the service that way. On the front end, being able to see when there are maybe stacked calls for an API that may be held up, that can prevent the UX from responding appropriately and in a timely fashion. Things like that.
Chris, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say that from my perspective, there's 3 sort of like major use cases for the proactive use of observability data. One is New Relic supports what we call it synthetic monitors, but basically it's a proactive check that it can be as simple as load this web page and tell me if it's loaded at all, or it can be a scripted, like a Selenium script that actually goes and executes a user flow. And it's extraordinarily useful to have these set up for like critical user flows, because you can wait for the real-time issue to happen, and then you still might be like trying to figure out exactly where this is breaking for users. But if you have a scripted check, which tells you exactly, hey, we have a scripted check where it goes in, logs into the streaming service, navigates to a piece of content, clicks play, so on and so forth. Like, and you have the reporting, you can say exactly where and what broke in a proactive manner, and you can execute it from different locations as well. Those same checks can run internally, so they're sort of the getting all of the real user data and production data, but also issuing and executing sort of proactive checks against those critical flows, whether it's internal API checks or external user flows. Those are very high signal, because you've structured the check exactly, as opposed to reconstructing what's happening from a user metric standpoint. So that's one area I would say. The next area I would say is making sure that observability is deployed in a well-reasoned way in pre-production environments, not just in production. It's not just a tool for prevention of production issues. it's measurement, right? At its heart, observability is inspection and measurement, right? That's then democratized to users like for different use cases, but you should be measuring your pre-production and even development and QA environments with, okay, maybe not the exact same rigor, especially like proactive checks, but with a similar amount of rigor to ensure that your expectations of performance of your system are enforced at all earlier stages before it goes out to production, and sort of encoding that in the same system, not saying, oh, well, we have these other scripts and things that we run separate that go to some other system. And then when it hits production, those metrics are in New Relic automatically. Like if you're using different measurement approaches in different environments, it's a recipe for disaster, because eventually they're not going to match up, right? Because of methodology differences and other things. So that's one. And then I would say the third is, of course, we've talked mostly about like performance data so far, but capturing business relevant telemetry on your observability data, whether that's, okay, you're capturing all this data about the performance of the video stream, or but if there's client side ads being inserted, like what campaign was that? Where was it pulling the creative from? Like, or information about user, like not just user IDs, but if you have a ad supported streaming service with multiple levels of subscription tiers, like what subscription level is this user on, which of course then can correlate to like what bit rates can they access and renditions, and what type of ads are they being served. You can do a lot of really interesting query and inspection of that data from a business performance standpoint in New Relic, not just a technical performance standpoint. And we can export that data to other systems as well. For, if you want to run a machine learning analysis on some of that, that's obviously not something you would do inside of New Relic, but we can support those use cases too. So, 3 different answers there, 2 from a technical proactive standpoint and 1 more from a business observability standpoint.
It's a good call out that you had there. Just obviously that observability relates to all components of the application. That's all partners involved, all features and that sort of thing, to make sure that you are providing the best service possible. And the ability to kind of look back and see where, not only based on, like you said, video stream quality, but like subscription management items, that's also going to be very helpful. I wanted to touch in a little bit on one of the first points you made there. You were talking about automation and scripting to kind of validate some tests. How have you seen a greater increase in the use of this, or is it becoming more popular now to support a little bit more automation to validate some components like that?
Absolutely. New Relic specifically, and I could speak mostly to New Relic's perspective on this, but we've always developed our platform with engineering and practitioner friendliness in mind, and a big part of that is automation. It's just an enormous amount of the New Relic platform that can be driven via automation, whether that's utilizing like providers like Terraform, or writing directly against our GraphQL an endpoint where you can manage account level mutations, the data filtering rules, and just configuration of the account, alerting, dashboard replication. It's really a very highly scriptable platform, and if you look at the investments we've made in that area, it's always been friendly to some degree. I mean, our API access, but our GraphQL API is actually like, I'm always consistently amazed by like what we can do in there and the features that we're making available, as well as the integrations we have with Terraform and other providers like that. So I think New Relic specifically is a very automation friendly platform, and we've definitely seen an evolution of customers' sort of ability and interest in those sort of synthetic checks. That's always been there, but I feel like we've also made that friendlier as well in terms of the ability to create those scripted monitors and and more complex checks, we've made that easier. So I think with that comes more adoption for sure.
Steven, from an operations perspective, have we looked into, or how have we been leveraging some of this automation for service management?
So primarily we use it for making sure that third-party providers that come into that we integrate with are available, giving the right responses, timely responses. A good example, we've had a customer who was integrated with a third party who at random intervals, this third party would have a spike in response time. It would go from sub 100 milliseconds to a couple of seconds. And initially, the customer was pointing towards Accedo, since we were running the infrastructure and apps for them. And what we were able to do was, based on the historical automated checks that we were able to use, we were able to point back towards the proper source of the issue, and the customer was able to help get that provider to increase the level of their infrastructure to better be able to support this their service, which helped their customers.
Up next, I'm going to ask you guys both this question. I'd just like to see both of your takes and what your thoughts are. This is just pretty general, but I'll start with Chris, and then I'll go over to you, Steven. What sort of trends are you seeing, and what's up and coming with regards to innovation for observability?
Sure. Do you want me to answer specifically in regards to observability in general, or for me, in media and entertainment space, or both?
Let's go both. Let's hear what's coming.
Sure. I think when it comes to observability in general, and I don't think this is going to be any surprise to for technology in general, is everyone's talking about AI, generative AI, how we leverage it. New Relic, we have for a long time had alert correlation, anomaly detection. That's not necessarily generative AI. That's just, it's all advanced statistics, right? All AI is, but it's just statistical modeling and analytics. And we've been investing in generative AI, assistant to help you understand observability data, because one of the things that you get with observability is, we've talked, it's very broad, right? Like a good observability deployment is very broad, and ideally highly structured. New Relic has put a lot of effort into our our entity and relationship model, where basically you instrument your system with New Relic, and then when you go into our map view, it kind of looks like an architecture diagram of your system, which is pretty cool, because the way you're thinking about your system is that's how you think about it. You think these components that are connected, they talk to one another, and it's kind of cool to see that reflected in the platform. And all of those are generating their own signal, those metrics, events, logs, and traces I talked about. They're all coming into the system, and then you've got a bunch of users who say, "Yeah, that's great, but I want my own dashboard." And pretty soon, no matter how well structured the UI is, any observability platform, you start to get some knowledge silos, or some people who know more about this type of data than this other one. Or and wouldn't it be great if you could just talk to your observability system and tell me what's going on with that spike? What else is related to that? What's going on there? What data types did someone use to build this dashboard? What all those sort of questions that you ask, and then you got to go to documentation or ask someone on your team, or right, there's just interaction there. We've been putting a lot of effort into that space, into how can we help users more naturally understand their data. And I think that's a trend with all everyone who has a large observability deployment is thinking about that, right? Because how do we make it more natural for users to discover what's going on in their environment, what this data represents, where it's coming from, how it's related to other data sources. So I think that's one area in observability I see a trend. For media and entertainment specifically, so much of that data in a lot of the customers I work with, it ends up very highly siloed. You see they've got their video QoE data in some tool. They've got maybe they're mobile and browser data. A lot of times, the client side data is in New Relic. We've got that with us. Maybe the back end, but then maybe all their logs are going to another tool as well, or the CDN logs are going somewhere else, and backend logs are going somewhere else. And the next thing you know, when you have a complex outage, you've got all these screens up together with tools that don't necessarily integrate together, trying to relate that what to the why. And I've seen, at a lot of customers, as well as conferences, and I think that one of the big trends in the industry is cohesion between those different systems. Like right now, if you want to trace a user session from what's happening in the video player, what's happening in the client, what's happening in all the various either server-side or client-side ad requests that are tied to that particular user, what's happening in their client-side application, either in the web or the mobile, then what's happening in all the back-end microservices, maybe your DRM proxies through something, or you've got some, recommendation service that's powering that, right? So what's happening in the back-end architecture, and then all the infrastructure that's hosting that. Like piecing that together for a single user session is very difficult. And I haven't seen a solution in the industry that that ties those together in the way that a New Relic can. But I see that as a need for the industry, that full understanding of what's happening through user sessions. There are solutions like CMCD out there that are becoming more prevalent, that are, I think, trying to tackle this problem to some degree. And I think New Relic's coming at it. Obviously, we support CMCD with like a log parsing and everything, but we're coming at that from another angle as well. So I think it's like that cohesion between all the different data sources is something coming together in sort of one system where you can make sense of it. That's something I see in media.
Steven, what are your thoughts?
I would echo a lot of what Chris said. Honestly, for us, generative AI is going to be a key trend as we look at it across our entire business and how it can best benefit our customers. But also things like being able to bring in third-party data sources and being able to get a more clear view of what's going on across the entire, not just the technical infrastructure, but also the social infrastructure, right? What are customers saying about your applications in real time? And how do you equate that to a potential issue that you might be experiencing so that you get ahead of problems as opposed to just reacting to them?
It's an interesting point you brought up there about going outside of just your actual services, right? And leveraging social media and these other platforms where you could actually be finding out about things that aren't noticeable within just measurement generally. I guess it's a different perspective that you have to consider, where you're not just leveraging the tools that you have. It's all these items outside of it as well. Chris, how has that come up for New Relic, or how has that been? What are you guys interested in looking at there?
Sure, from like social sentiment and those sort of, actually this is the sort of area where partner like Accedo is really great for us, because New Relic, for social sentiment, where you click a few boxes, you set up your ingest streams, and we do sentiment analysis and link it with you. Like that's just not a capability that that we've developed into. But one of the advantages of our platform is it's very easy to get data in from a variety of sources. It's very easy to integrate against, and easy to, once that data's in, it doesn't feel like it's excluded. Like third data that's not coming from a New Relic, like first party source, doesn't suddenly feel like, oh, but because it's custom data, I can't do all the normal things I would do with it. Once it's in our platform, we're extremely good at handling it in a way that feels native and natural. So it allows us to easily support those type of use cases where, okay, well, we don't have a telemetry acquisition and an analytics strategy for social sentiment, but if you give us that data set, we can then help you very easily correlate it with everything else. So I think that's an area where our better together story is really strong.
I would add one other thing. The idea that external services being brought into New Relic, like Chris said, they're first party citizens, so it works very, very well, and that leads to great ideas for being able to extend the New Relic platform in directions that Chris and his team may not have thought yet for us. I mean, we have a few things in the works that we're working on with New Relic as part of the partnership, but there are other things that we have ideas for the future that we're trying to get the other stuff done first before we go down that path. But the extensibility of New Relic is one of the things that makes it a strong platform for us personally.
As a customer leverages a New Relic, it changes throughout the life cycle of the service. So how does observability alter or get impacted at different stages versus like when you're first launching to after it's become a mature service and you're looking to do different changes? Is there different key aspects that you advocate for that they look at or something along those lines?
Ideally, when you're first implementing observability into your infrastructure, I can give you sort of the natural customer flow, like the self-explored one, and then sort of what you get if you sort of like a mature approach to it. A lot of times, the customer will deploy an observability solution, say install mobile monitoring for like an iOS or Android app, and then our APM for like the backend service that's monitoring it, and maybe some video telemetry if you're serving video in there. Usually, a lot of times it's a self-led, self-directed New Relic customer coming with like a PLG funnel, kind of install those things, and then realize sort of, oh wow, these APIs are like really flexible. Look, I can add user IDs on here, and oh look, I can add like what A/B test cohort these people are in, and oh look, I can, and suddenly they start having more and more and more custom data. And because that custom data is sort of annotated on the performance telemetry, you get a really nice like cohesion between ability to understand like who is affected and why from different like technical issues. I feel like for larger customers, that sort of self-directed approach sometimes without guidance or a strong opinion on what to measure can end up a bit frayed because people just kind of add their attributes in there from wherever, and then suddenly you've got duplication and other things, and that's a hard problem with just any recording of any system, monitoring observability of any system with anything. It's not a New Relic specific thing. That's just measurement in general. But if I feel like ideally, when you go into like a observability deployment, whether you're migrating or you're putting it in a system for the first time, you have an opinion, or you work with someone, an observability expert, whether it's internal at your company or like someone from New Relic, to help you develop an opinion of what you're going to measure and why, because that helps you do a few things. One, it reduces some iteration. You're always going to iterate, and iteration is important. The long tail, you're always going to be adding more things and discovering and adding. But it reduces a lot of that. Initially, we deployed, oh, we also want to measure this. Oh, we also want to measure this. You can sort of get an opinion, but it also helps you get an opinion on what data you need to collect and why, and the value of collecting that data. Because, sometimes there are cases where I've worked with media customers who they're sending us huge amounts of data of that they decide like, oh, we didn't actually need that. And that's not good for anyone. That's not good. It's not good for us because suddenly, we built this baseline, with the account, this, a contract in place, and like we want to make sure all the data you're sending us is valuable to you, and you also want to make sure all the data you're sending us is valuable to you. So going through that exercise up front of just deciding what you want to observe, why, what the value of it is to you, what you're going to do with that data, it helps you one, develop your like a good strategy for the use of the data, but also it helps you actually determine the scope of like what you're observing and why. Not just the scope of what systems you're instrumenting, but what data you want to collect from them. Because no one, it's not good for anyone if you just decide we're going to observe absolutely every tiny. CDN logs are a great example. Don't send someone 100% of your CDN logs, like, sending all the 200 OK responses or all your CDN requests. It's not good for us. It's not good for you. Like, you don't want to pay for that data. We no one. So that's like a good example of something you might organically decide to do. Oh, forward our CDN logs to New Relic, and then suddenly you didn't think about what you were going to do with that data or why. So I think it's more about just having an opinion going in about that, or working with someone, like myself or an expert to determine that strategy before you move forward.
It's a great call out talking about just how important some sort of discovery period is for any project. Realistically, having the time to discuss and review and really identify the key important structures and items that you wish to tackle just makes the actual implementation miles and much, much easier. One of the other obvious key important figures is the ability to, I guess, define cost optimizations or different abilities to find different ways to save. What is a way that you like to advocate that New Relic helps support provide some sort of cost optimizations?
One of the clear ones that we're able to do is help you to correlate performance and scale, and by proxy cost. You can always measure, let's say I take the classic example of AWS deployment. I don't know, a bunch of EC2 instances with applications running on it. Obviously, things get more complicated now with different types of services, but very simple example. It's great to say, okay, well, our average CPU utilization or whatever on these hosts that we host the app on is X, and we can save this amount of money by packing them this many more instances into or of the application into host instances of this size. But New Relic can really help do that sort of analytics holistically on your architecture with a view to the end customer experience. So the question suddenly becomes not simply about like those basic level scaling measurements, but more around how that impacts like the end user experience in relationship to how you're scaling your architecture. When you have a measurement at all stages of your architecture for utilization versus performance, and not performance just scoped to the performance of that system, but all of its downstream impacts, right? That gives you a much better view into where you can optimize, where you are over provisioning, for a variety of reasons, maybe a service looks like it's consuming a lot of time, but actually like it's not being utilized downstream at all, right? Like understand the relationship between not just that system and where it's being hosted, but also like the downstream utilization of it. That gives you a much better picture into optimization opportunities than just looking sort of like service by service.
To reinforce Chris's point, the whole key for observability, at least with what we do with New Relic, is to get that end-to-end view, right? So if we are looking at a customer who has an infrastructure that they are asking us to look at cost optimization, how do we figure out the best way to do that without affecting the end user service? And that can be, do we, as Chris said, do we look at larger instance sizes to cram more containers into a service, or Do we look at response times on the end client, right? Going back to the API stacking that I talked about earlier, and is there a way to break those down so that we're making more smaller calls, which may reduce what we need on at some point in the service, but also providing a better experience for the customer?
The insights provided by New Relic when we are observing different services, how often do we see that we are able to, I guess, identify key issues, develop mitigation plans, and then launch in short periods of time? What is how's the process normally go, and how, I guess, how quickly can we get back to our customers for that?
Well, it obviously depends on the severity of the issue, right? But if we're looking at things like middleware optimization, that can be a period of hours to days to identify and come to some resolution. If we're talking about infrastructure problems that are affecting the availability of the service, that's minutes to hours, right? Depending on the SLA we've agreed to with our customer. But for us, New Relic is our primary tool that we use for troubleshooting any sort of service issue problems that are reported to us outside of like normal defects in an application, like maybe something with the UX or the buttons not working, right? Those are different cases, and those are handled differently than availability or service impacting issues. But for us with New Relic, we've spent a lot of time with Chris's team, with other members of the New Relic team, to optimize what we do so that we have the best possible response time and resolution time for our customers.
One last question here before I think we wrap up. Chris, what are you hoping people take away from the Accedo New Relic partnership at IBC?
One of the most important aspects of this partnership is, I think, Accedo as a vehicle for New Relic really helps drive home not just the holistic nature of an observability solution, but also how to structure a well-reasoned observability deployment for media and entertainment. What I described before about a lot of times the challenge is that a self-serve customer might face by trying to start their own observability deployment of a media system. And we can add these attributes here. And, like the importance of engaging with a team that has a significant amount of expertise, not just in New Relic and observability, but also in media, to help deliver a really high functioning, high value observability solution for not just this, of course, like outages are super costly for everyone, but also like the proactive insights out of an observability solution. I feel like Accedo is such a phenomenal partner for delivering on that promise of what an end-to-end observability solution can offer a customer, as well as the insights it can provide specific for media and entertainment.
Steven, anything to add?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing is number one, the strength of the talent that New Relic brings, the strength of the talent that Accedo brings, that we use together, the support we get just from being able to look at new ideas, but also the ability to leverage a single end-to-end platform that is something that is unique right now in the market, right? There's no one else in the market right now, to my knowledge, that has the ability to deliver video metric analysis all the way back to the infrastructure, to the hardware it's running on, from applications, from microservices, whatever it is, right? That end to end, that single point, that single tool, and leveraging Acedo's expertise on top of that just makes this a wonderful partnership for both companies.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks. Thank you very much, Chris, Steven. Really appreciate your time. It was great to have a chat with you guys. Really appreciate it again, gents.
Of course. Thanks, Neil.
Yeah. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Steven.
Great. That's it for today's episode. Thank you for listening. If you like this episode, please subscribe. If you're interested in reading the observability report that Steven and Chris worked on, we'll attach a link to it in the description of this episode. If you have any questions about the episode or you'd just like to reach out, feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn or email us at playback.podcast@accedo.tv. Thanks. Have a great day.